permite que los niños pongan en práctica todas las materias.
The Honourable House resume its sitting. Call up the roll.
Mr. Speaker, before we do the roll, may I make a statement here? Is that I noticed that members, during prayers, members come in and walk into their seats. We ought to understand that while one's prayer is being done, you do not come through the door, and if you come in, you just don't go to your seat. You wait until the prayer is completed before you enter the house. And I notice we have been doing this, and we have been doing this all while. So I do hope that members do respect the sanctity of prayer, that you stay outside, because that's this tradition we have had over the years. You wait until the prayer is done.
Members, the leader of the House is correct. And I would like to add, when the House adjourns, members should allow the mayors to go to the door before they start to leave their seats and have chatting all over the place. Members in the gallery stands until the mayor goes through the door, and they watch members of the House doing all sorts of things. Please, let's keep the standards according to standing orders. Call of the roll.
Mr. Whittle, Mr. Holness, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett. That's Mr. Bartlett. Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Daryl Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Wheatley, Dr. Tufton, I didn't know somebody else seat, Mrs. Malahuford, Mr. Spencer, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Green, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, he wasn't here this morning. Mr. Brown, Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, that's her, don't I? Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Mr. Main, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nito, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Terry Long, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, not here. Miss Daly, Mr. R. Scott, somebody else came. Mr. Michael Phillips, Mr. Michael Phillips, Mr. Jackson, right. Mr. Daly, no, didn't answer. Okay. Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Mr. Wright, Mr. Wright, not here. Mr. Bunting, yeah, got him. All right, I think that's it. Mr. Hales answered. He answered. I heard him answer. I have him.
Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Ministry Paper Number 18, an annual report of the Public Accountancy Board for the year ended March 31, 2017. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Jamaica Railway Corporation for the financial year 2015-2016. Auditor General's report on the examination of the fiscal policy paper for the year 2018-2019. The Local Governance Municipal of Portmore Change of Name Order 2018 and Local Governance Municipal of Portmore Change of Name Order Resolution under the Local Governance Act. Certified Appropriation Account, Head 0400, Ministry, Office of the Contractor General, 2015-2016.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Warmington.
I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the House. I'll move. Whereas by virtue of Section 48B, subsection 1 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act, the Minister of Finance and the Public Service tabled the Government of Jamaica fiscal policy paper for the financial year 2018-2019 on the 15th day of February 2018. And whereas pursuant to Section 48B, subsection 6 of the said Act, the Auditor General examined the components of the said fiscal policy paper and provided the requisite report thereon to the House of Representatives on the 28th day of February 2018. Be it resolved that the report of the Auditor General on the Government of Jamaica fiscal policy paper for the financial year 2018-2019, which was laid on the table of the House on the 28th day of February 2018, be referred to the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all the members of the House, to aid in consideration of the estimate of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2019. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the expiration of 21 days, I intend to ask the Minister of Science, Technology and Energy the following questions.
Mr. Tweed.
Mr. Speaker, permission to speak from a seat other than my own. Mr. Speaker, will you please advise me, as you had promised to do, when the long overdue answer to question 11 in my name will be available?
Member, Mr. Tweed, I understand that you and I should know that the House has been prorogued.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I can't hear.
And that questions would fall off the order paper.
Really?
And you would have to return them if you so desire. I think I heard that the minister had made some suggestion about matters from the last parliament.
Mr. Speaker, what I said then is that motions can be carried over into the other parliament, and that I moved that motion, that resolution. What I said to the member then, that the questions cannot be carried forward over into the other session. So they could relay those questions and make every effort to make sure that they are answered within the required time. That's what I said the last time.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Paulwell.
Yes, in relation to questions, and I do take the point that the questions will have to be retabled. But I'm giving notice that after 21 days, the standing orders require the approval of the questioner for any extension. And that is going to be strict. I'm suggesting to you, Mr. Speaker, that it be strictly enforced, that the person must give approval for any extension. So we really want the questions to be answered by the 21-day period. Yeah, man.
So, Mr. Speaker.
Member, please.
So, in keeping with that discussion, at the expiration of 21 days, I'd like to ask the Minister of Tourism the following questions that fell off the order paper.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you accept that, would you, at the expiry of 21 days, will you require the Minister of Transport to answer the question previously listed at number 11, which, in defiance of all logic, has fallen off the paper, and which with your permission, can now be restored? Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. It cannot be done that way. I just said it. The member has to lay the questions on the table of the House again. Not talking about the one that he's talking about, the one that he asked. It's the same thing? Don't you ask him then? If he's laying the question, so you can answer the question then.
Mr. Tweed, you could just submit those questions at the next sitting of the House.
Submission, of course,
and we will
Mr. Speaker.
Follow the procedure as requested by
Mr. Speaker, is there a logic behind this?
Opposition.
We are thoughtful people. Is there a logic behind this? Of course, I have no alternative, but I'm inviting you, sir, as the presiding officer of the House, to really explain, if you can, what the logic of that is. What is the difference between a motion and a question? And particularly in the instance when the question has languished for months on end, from July last year, and it must now, because of the accident of a proroguing, having to be written and submitted all over again. Is that really sensible? May it please you.
Mr. Paulwell did take care of that and has given me certain guidelines, and I propose that I will follow those guidelines. Do we go on to motions that may be made at the commencement of business, public business requiring notice? Motions relating to the sitting of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker, now I ask for approval of the motion. Notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker, it's not intended to do further business of the House today, so I ask the House be suspended until next week, Thursday, the 8th of March at 2 p.m.
Mr. Warmington, we go back to the committee after this? Whatever you indicate so that members don't
Mr.
leave.
Speaker, I don't think I need to indicate. We adjourn, we suspend the committee to have lunch, to return for the House to be convened, to receive the report, after which you go back to the committee. So I don't think I need to say that.
Those in favor of the resolution? Those in favor? Those against? This Honourable House stands adjourned until the 28th, the 8th of March at 2 p.m.
Protect Jamaica.